In the classic gangster drama The Sopranos, we follow the trials and tribulations of New Jersey mob boss Tony Soprano as he navigates his puny ship that is his glorified crew of a mafia family in and around the murky seas of the underworld and law enforcement. Tony faces professional issues during his tenure as boss, such as dysentery in the ranks, and personal issues like the dicked-up antics of his son Anthony Jr. Sometimes his professional and personal life spill over into each other. Sometimes he faces extreme, incredulous situations such as the attempted suicide of his son being shot at by his uncle Junior, or a war being launched against him and his family by Lupertazzi crime boss Phil Deotardo. And part of the joy of watching The Sopranos is seeing all of the colourful and interesting characters in Tony's life interact with both him and each other, and of the interesting and memorable storylines that come about as a result. But The Sopranos is much more than a simple mob drama. The show isn't afraid to deal with socio-political issues, carry out deep introspective character studies, and even dabble in the supernatural. One of the more fascinating elements of The Sopranos is Tony Soprano himself and his psyche. This is explored heavily during Tony's therapy sessions with Dr. Melfi. And one of the more ironic elements of Tony's therapy sessions and his entire persona as a whole is that rather than become a better person as the show goes on, Tony actually gets worse and sinks further and further into his depraved, selfish and narcissistic tendencies, to an extent that he seems a completely different person by the time season 6 rolls around, having fully embraced his toxic personality. Sure, he wasn't exactly a great guy in earlier seasons, but there was a lot to admire in Tony of early seasons, not least because, as the therapy session showed, he wrestled a lot with his conscience. One of the many things about Tony that changed was, weirdly, his accent. James Gandolfini, who played Tony, is from Jersey, and sure, throughout the duration of the show's run, aside from those dream episodes, Gandolfini does play Tony with a Jersey accent. But no one can deny that there is a clear evolution of the way Tony talks through the show, and much like his behaviour, Tony's accent is completely different in the final season compared to the first. In the first 1 or 2 seasons, he speaks like this.
They said it was a panic attack. Of course, all the blood work and the neurological work came back negative.
And in later seasons, like season 5 and 6, he speaks like this.
He's not looking at Christopher. A rat died in the wall back there with some shit.
So what is the reason for such a change? Well, there could be several reasons. For one, Gandolfini may have been testing the waters with his accent in the pilot and the first season, with the character not yet fully developed. Everything was of course new in season 1, and many changes were made. Tony went from being the boss in the pilot to just another capo. Actors who played certain characters ended up playing completely new ones. It's not crazy to suggest that Gandolfini was finding his feet with getting the voice of Tony Soprano right, and he settled with it in around the 3rd season. After all, the voice is now iconic, and it's not at all how Gandolfini talks like in real life, and perhaps is something he and his dialect coach just felt he needed to work on, until he found the right rhythm in the voice of Tony Soprano to bring this character to life. But that still doesn't explain why the jerseyness, shall we say, of Tony's accent is so intense by the end of the show. There's so much emphasis on the shh during dialogue that you might think he's doing a Sean Connery impression. One theory I find interesting, and it's why I talked about Tony's increasing depravity earlier in the video, is that as Tony's personality changes and becomes more ugly, pronounced and visible, so does his appearance. His inner soul is mirrored by his outer exterior. As the show goes on, Tony becomes more fat, he becomes more bold, he increasingly becomes less handsome, and this is a perfect reflection of his sociopathic nature consuming his psyche. Tony is also extremely excessive in later seasons, with his food intake, his spending, his whoring, his gambling. Even the way he eats looks more aggressive. I don't think it's crazy to suggest that his accent becoming more pronounced is a metaphor for his changing characteristics. That's not to say having a strong Jersey accent must mean you like to kill proteges in your spare time, but it could be something the show used to highlight his growing depravity. Whether this was something done intentionally or not, I think it works. Another possible metaphor is that Tony becomes more and more like his true sociopathic self as the series progresses. The false exterior, the loving husband, the boss who cares for his underlings, all of that stuff is peeled away to reveal his true self, and as it does so, So does the slightly stiff accent of earlier seasons, where he may have been trying to pass off as more educated or civilized, with it giving away to what his accent eventually becomes, a nod that he's accepted what he is. Perhaps it wasn't even a change done consciously by Gandolfini. After all, he really was putting on weight, and he was doing coke at the time of filming. Perhaps things like these had an actual effect on the way he talked, and when he did the Tony Soprano accent, he found that he couldn't quite do it as he previously did. Well, funnily enough, it seems there actually is an answer to this mystery, and the previous point isn't far from the truth. The reality is actually quite simple. James Gandolfini seemingly forgot how to do the accent. James's son Michael spoke about this on the podcast Talking Sopranos, where he talked about the accent of Tony Soprano and how it changes in the last few seasons. Michael, of course, played a young Tony Soprano in the Sopranos prequel movie, The Many Saints of Newark, and he spoke about avoiding mimicking his father's voice from the latter few seasons, as of course this is how Tony spoke later on. He said, "There's a major shift between season 4 and 5. It gets a lot darker, my dad gets a lot darker, and his accent changes. If he has an S and he kind of has a lisp, he starts to go with the SH. Michael Imperioli, who plays Christopher in the show, then said, "You know what's really funny? One day he said, 'Come here, I want to show you something.' I go into his trailer, he puts this video in, and David had cut all these scenes where they couldn't understand what Jim was saying. And it was right around then, and we started laughing hysterically because neither one of us could understand it either. It was really funny, and then he was like, I gotta start paying attention to what the fuck I'm saying. Because he wasn't aware that he was doing it." Michael Gandolfini then said, "His performance fully changes." And he asked Imperioli, "Was that the year you went on hiatus?" That's what I always guessed, that he came back and fucking forgot how to do the accent. Imperioli acknowledged the hiatus, and so it seems that, with this story, the actual reason for Tony's different sounding accent might simply be that James Gandolfini just couldn't do the voice as he had done so before, after taking a long break playing the character. His own son recognizes that there's a difference, and he felt the hiatus played a part. So maybe that's all there is to it. But as Michael mentions in the interview, everything changes in the later seasons. Everything gets darker. So perhaps it's fitting for Tony's voice to become more intense with how grim and dark the later seasons are. So what do you think about all of this? Do you like the way Tony talked in the later seasons, or did you prefer season 1 Tony Soprano? Why do you think his voice changed? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.